Hey guys, tonight we're diving into something that started as the smallest, strangest accident in my quiet old house and somehow ended up reshaping the way I see life, time, and the woman I thought I'd already lost. You probably won't survive this story. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to watch the video and subscribe, but only if you really like what I'm doing here. Now turn off the lights, maybe turn on the fan for some soothing noise, and let's comfortably embark on tonight's journey. I live alone now in the same creaky house my wife and I bought 43 years ago. Every room smells faintly of old wood and lavender polish, her favorite scent. The winters here are cold, and lately the floorboards in the reading room have started to buckle from age. I was crouched there that morning, hammer in one hand, muttering to myself about the endless repairs that come with being old and stubborn enough to refuse moving to an apartment. That's when I noticed a thin, yellow corner sticking out from beneath the edge of a warped plank. At first I thought it was an old receipt, maybe one of hers. But when I pried the board loose and pulled it out, I froze. It was a train ticket. The paper was stiff and brittle, its edges brown with time, but the ink was perfectly clear. My name wasn't on it, just the destination, Rosewood Station. Departure, June 17, 2009. And right below that, a printed note, expired. Only here's the thing, that morning was June 16, 2025, 16 years later. And somehow the ticket said expired, yet the departure date was tomorrow. People still debate whether time works like a straight line or a circle. I've always leaned toward logic clocks tick forward, people grow older, end of story. But holding that piece of paper with its impossible date, I felt something I hadn't felt in years, the spark of unease that lives between fear and curiosity. I sat down on the floor and turned the ticket over. On the back, written in blue ink, were 3 words. In cursive, "Don't be late." The handwriting wasn't hers. My wife's loops and curls were distinct, soft, and generous. This writing was tighter, deliberate, almost masculine. I laughed under my breath because that's what you do when you're too old to believe in ghosts, but too tired to deny them. You know, psychologists say that older adults often cling to objects that connect them to the past. Wedding rings, letters, old books, recipes. It's a way to stay anchored when time keeps washing the shore away. Maybe that's all this was, a trick of my mind. A misprinted ticket, some prank from the past buried in the floor. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd seen that name before, Rosewood Station. It nagged at me all day. I went through my wife's old scrapbooks and albums, the kind where she'd paste ticket stubs, postcards, and pressed flowers. I found one page labeled "Our Little Escapes." There were tickets from movies, museums, even a ferry ride we took to see her sister. But right there near the bottom of the page was a small photograph of a train platform. The sign in the background read Rosewood. Only, I didn't remember ever being there. I called my son later that afternoon, mostly to distract myself. He's busy, lives in Boston running some software company I barely understand. When I mentioned the ticket, he chuckled and said, "Dad, maybe you've been reading too much mystery fiction again." He's not wrong. Retirement does strange things to the brain. The days blur together until the smallest oddity feels monumental. But here's something interesting in old estate law. There's a concept called testamentary intent. It basically means that what matters isn't just what's written in a will, but what the person intended. Sometimes the meaning hides beneath the words. That's what the ticket felt like, a message disguised as something mundane. That night, I set the ticket on my bedside table. I kept glancing at it under the soft amber light, that faded print almost glowing. And somewhere between waking and dreaming, I heard her voice. It wasn't clear, more like a whisper brushing through a half-open door. "You're late again, darling. she said, the same teasing tone she used when I forgot our anniversary. I sat up, heart pounding, staring at the empty doorway. It's funny, grief doesn't vanish. It just changes color. Some days it's black and heavy like fresh soil. Other days it's translucent, hovering in the air like dust in sunlight. That night it was golden, shimmering, almost kind. I reached for the ticket and held it close, like it might pulse with an answer. The next morning I woke up with one thought, echoing in my mind, Rosewood Station. I opened my laptop and searched. There were no current listings. The only reference I found was a historical note from the county archive, Rosewood Station, established 1894, closed 1986, demolished 1991. But that didn't make sense. If the place was demolished, why would there be a ticket printed in 2009? People still debate whether grief opens doors or builds walls. I guess I decided to find out. I packed my thermos, put on the same brown coat she once said made me look reliable, and slipped the ticket into my wallet. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe it was everything. Either way, I needed to see where it led. The morning light poured through the window as I locked the door behind me, the smell of dust and memory lingering. My hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from something older anticipation. After all, it had been years since I'd taken a train. As I stepped out onto the empty street, the world felt both real and slightly tilted, as if I'd woken up in a familiar place, rearranged by invisible hands. Somewhere in my chest, something whispered again, "Don't be late." The morning air was crisp, the kind that stings the lungs a little, but wakes you up better than coffee ever could. I stood at the old bus stop, the ticket in my coat pocket, pressing against my chest like a secret heartbeat. I hadn't traveled by train in decades, not since the funeral. My wife loved trains. She said they gave people time to think between places. I used to tease her that she liked them because nobody could walk away mid-conversation. She'd just smile and rest her head on the window. That image haunted me the entire ride into town. When I reached the transit office, the clerk looked about 12 years old. I slid the ticket across the counter. "Can you tell me if this destination still exists?" I asked. She frowned, scanning the faded barcode with her tablet. The scanner beeped once, bright and clean. She glanced up, puzzled. "It says, valid, sir. Departure, June 17th, 9:05 a.m. Platform 7. I laughed. "That's impossible. The station was torn down 30-plus years ago." She turned the ticket over, reading the back. "Don't be late," she murmured. "That's creepy." Then after a pause, maybe they reopened it as a museum. People still debate whether machines can truly glitch, or if we just interpret coincidences to make sense of the impossible. I didn't want to sound crazy, so I thanked her and left. But I couldn't ignore the way her scanner had beeped like a heartbeat acknowledging mine. A taxi dropped me near the edge of the old industrial district. The place was half erased by time, broken windows, ivy-swallowed walls, silence heavy enough to feel. Yet as I rounded a corner there, it was a cracked wooden sign, half-tilted, but unmistakable Rosewood Station. The paint had peeled, the clock above the entrance was stuck at 9:05, and pigeons nested inside the rafters. But the building still stood. I walked in my cane, tapping against the dusty tiles. The air smelled faintly of coal and old rain. I expected emptiness, but instead I heard a faint hum, low, steady, electric. In the center of the hall stood an old ticket gate, powered somehow, its little green light blinking every few seconds. I hesitated, took out my ticket, and for reasons I can't explain, slid it through. The gate beeped the same bright tone as the clerk's scanner and clicked open. Now, rationally, that shouldn't have happened. The power grid had been cut off from this part of town years ago. I read about it in the paper. People still debate whether energy can linger in places like static in the air or memory in old walls. Maybe this was just residual current. Maybe it was something else entirely. As I stepped onto the platform, the sound changed. The hum deepened like the breath of something enormous sleeping beneath the ground. The rails were still there, rusted but intact, stretching into a tunnel that disappeared into darkness. On the opposite side, someone had set up candles in a neat row along the wall, flickering, even though there was no breeze. I walked slowly along the platform edge, every footstep stirring echoes that seemed to answer back. A faint whisper brushed my ear like wind, but shaped like words. "You're early this time." I froze. It was her voice, my wife's. Not imagined, not dreamlike. Real enough to make my knees weaken. I turned sharply, scanning the platform, but saw no one. There's a psychological theory called pareidolia, the mind's tendency to find patterns or meaning in randomness. Faces in clouds, voices in static, ghosts in grief. Maybe that's what was happening. Or maybe the human heart is just an antenna tuned to those we've loved too deeply to let go. At the far end of the platform hung a framed timetable, glass cracked but legible. One line stood out, 9:05 a.m. Homebound, one way. No date, just that. I checked my watch, 8:54. 11 minutes. I sat down on a bench. It groaned beneath me, dust motes rising in lazy swirls. I thought about calling my son, telling him where I was, but what could I even say? "Hey kid, I'm waiting at a station that shouldn't exist for a train that might take me God knows where." He'd probably call the police. You know, there's an odd cultural ritual in Japan, where people visit abandoned train stations on anniversaries of loved ones' deaths. They believe trains are bridges between the living and the departed, and sitting on the platform helps messages cross that border. I'd read that once in a magazine years ago, but it only came back to me now. The clock above the platform twitched. 1 minute to 9. The hum grew louder. My pulse matched it, steady and terrified. I stood, clutching my ticket. A single light flickered deep inside the tunnel. Then came the faintest vibration beneath my shoes, the rumble of metal on tracks. Impossible, I thought. The line's been dead for decades. But the sound grew until it filled the station like thunder. A gust of wind burst from the tunnel, carrying the smell of rain and hot iron. I stepped back as a train emerged, slow and gleaming. Its paint was pristine, its windows glowing amber. And on the front above the headlamp, a sign glowed faintly through the dust, "Rosewood Express." It screeched to a halt perfectly aligned with my platform. Doors slid open with a sigh, like lungs exhaling. No conductor, no passengers in sight, just a long corridor of velvet seats and soft golden light stretching beyond view. My ticket trembled between my fingers. Somewhere behind me, I thought I heard her laugh, the same laugh that once echoed through our kitchen when she burned toast on purpose to keep the toaster humble. I turned toward the sound, but the platform was empty. Still, something deep inside whispered that I wasn't supposed to leave yet, that this was only the beginning of whatever message she'd left behind. I didn't step inside the train that day. Not yet. Something in me, that quiet animal instinct that's kept old men from falling down staircases or signing bad mortgages, told me to wait. So I did what my wife would have done. I sat back down and watched. The doors stayed open for a long time, like the train was being polite, offering me a choice. And then, with a hiss of air and a sigh that felt almost disappointed, they closed. The train's lights dimmed, and it began to move slowly, gracefully, vanishing into the tunnel like a candle being swallowed by dark water. When it was gone, the silence returned, thicker than before. I stood there for several minutes, maybe longer, trying to make sense of it. Maybe I was sleepwalking through nostalgia. Maybe I was losing my mind. You'd be surprised how often those two feel identical. People still debate whether grief is something you carry or something that carries you. I think it's both. You drag it around every day like luggage, but sometimes when you least expect it, it grabs the handle and pulls you forward somewhere you never meant to go. That's what it felt like that morning. I went home. My hands shook so much I nearly dropped my keys trying to unlock the door. Inside the house was the same, quiet, neat, lonely. But it didn't feel the same. Every picture frame, every folded blanket, every dried flower in her vases seemed to be watching me, waiting for me to admit what had happened. On the kitchen table, I spread out the ticket, the photograph from her scrapbook, and a notebook. I started writing down everything, in order how I found it, what I saw, what time it was. I used to be an accountant, so my brain works in ledgers and logic. But as I wrote, the facts looked less like numbers and more like confessions. When I reached the part about the voice, her voice, I stopped. I poured myself some tea, her favorite brand Earl Grey with honey. The smell brought her back for a second, her hand brushing my shoulder, her soft humming of that Sinatra tune she used to play when we cooked together. And then something shifted. The clock on the wall, our old brass one from the flea market, ticked twice, then paused. I looked up. The second hand had stopped dead on 9:05. My breath caught. It was the same time the train had been scheduled to leave. I stood, grabbed my cane, and tapped the clock's glass. Nothing. The hands didn't move again. I checked my wristwatch. It was working fine. Only the house clock had stopped. There's a theory in cognitive psychology called reticular activation. It means once your brain fixates on something, it starts noticing patterns everywhere. Maybe that's what this was, my brain collecting coincidences like breadcrumbs. Or maybe patterns exist whether or not we notice them. The next morning I woke up before dawn. The ticket lay on my nightstand again, even though I remembered leaving it in the kitchen. The date hadn't changed, but the ink looked newer, darker, as if someone had just printed it. And that faint smell of lavender lingered around it. Her scent. I decided to go back, not because I wanted to, but because I couldn't stop myself. It's strange how curiosity once awakened becomes a kind of hunger. When I reached the station, the fog was heavier, curling around the roof beams like smoke. The candles were still there, flickering just as before, but this time I wasn't alone. There was a woman standing on the opposite platform. She wore a long red scarf, the same deep color as the one my wife used to wear every winter. She was facing away from me, gazing down the empty track. I froze. My mouth went dry. She lifted her hand and waved just once, slow, deliberate, the way my wife used to wave when we took different trains home after work. That small, tender motion that said, "I'll see you soon," I called out. "Hey, excuse me," my voice echoed against the walls. She turned. For a heartbeat, I thought it was her. The same dark hair, the same calm face, but the eyes, they were different. Younger, maybe, or older. It's hard to explain. She smiled faintly, like she recognized me, but didn't want to startle me. Then she pointed toward the tunnel. "What are you trying to tell me?" I whispered. And then, as suddenly as she'd appeared, she was gone. The scarf fluttered to the ground and vanished before it hit the platform. I don't know how long I stood there. Eventually, I forced myself to cross the tracks and walk to the other side. I touched the place where she'd stood, warm as if sunlight had just left it. The scent of her perfume lingered, faint but undeniable. Jasmine and cedar. You know, in certain old European mourning traditions, people would keep a piece of clothing from the deceased and wear it for a year to guide the spirit home. I'd read that somewhere in a library magazine decades ago, and suddenly it felt less like trivia and more like instruction. Maybe she was guiding me. Maybe she was lost too. The station clock struck once, though I swear it had no power source. I looked down at my ticket again. The date was still tomorrow. People still debate whether destiny comes once or keeps circling back until you're ready. I think tomorrow was giving me another chance. Sleep didn't come easy that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the woman in the red scarf, her faint smile, that gesture toward the tunnel, the air rippling around her like heat on pavement. My mind replayed it again and again until the images blended with old memories. My wife waving from a train window, the sound of wheels on tracks, her laughter as we raced down the platform, trying not to miss our connection to Chicago. The line between dream and recollection blurred until I couldn't tell which was mine and which belonged to someone or something else. Around midnight, I got up and walked into the reading room. The floorboard where I'd found the ticket was still loose. The scent of varnish and time hung thick in the air. I knelt down and peered inside the gap, half expecting to see something else. Another note, a photo, some forgotten trinket from our years together. But the hole was empty. I sighed, feeling foolish. Then, as I stood, a faint clatter echoed from inside the wall. Metal against wood. Something small and sharp. I fetched a flashlight and pried open a panel that had warped with age. There, tucked inside the insulation, was a small brass key on a faded blue ribbon. I pulled it out carefully. Etched along the bow was a number 211. I recognized that number. It was the suite we stayed in during our 25th anniversary trip to Rosewood Inn, a hotel that, as far as I knew, had been demolished years ago, along with the station. I laughed softly, though it came out sounding more like disbelief than humor. "All right, sweetheart," I said to the empty room. "You've got my attention." People still debate whether coincidences are messages or just noise. We dress up in meaning. I wasn't sure what this was yet, but I knew I couldn't stop now. The next morning, I called the county registry office. A polite woman on the line confirmed something strange. Rosewood Inn wasn't listed as demolished. "It's under private ownership," she said, "but the file hasn't been updated in decades. No utilities, no tax payments. It's frozen, like time had skipped over it." I took the first train into the neighboring county and caught a bus the rest of the way. The driver was quiet, an older man with pale eyes who seemed to recognize me. "Haven't been up there in a while," he said as I boarded. "You visiting the old grounds?" "What grounds?" I asked. "Rosewood," he replied simply, as if it explained everything. The ride took an hour through misty countryside. Fields gave way to dense woods, the kind where sunlight filters in thin ribbons that look like silk in the morning air. Then, through the trees, I saw the skeleton of a once beautiful building. The sign above the overgrown gate read Rosewood Inn. The structure was still standing, though nature was reclaiming it fast. Ivy climbed the walls, windows were fogged, and the front doors hung open just enough to invite or warn you. I pushed them gently and stepped inside. Dust swirled through a shaft of light like golden snow. The lobby was eerily intact. A grand chandelier above an empty check-in counter, faded wallpaper in the same pattern my wife used to love, tiny blue birds perched on vines. On the far wall hung a painting of a train pulling into a station beneath a sunset sky. I don't know why I walked straight to the stairs. Maybe the number on the key pulled me. Room 211, second floor end of the hall. My cane tapped softly on the carpet runner, each step creaking like a heartbeat. The door was there, its brass plate still shining faintly. The key slid in without resistance. The lock clicked. The door opened with a sigh, releasing a faint scent of jasmine. Inside, everything looked frozen in time. The lace curtains, the neatly made bed, a vase of dried roses on the nightstand. On the vanity sat a hairbrush still tangled with a few dark strands. My hands trembled as I touched it. "You really did come back here," I whispered. On the desk lay a small, leather-bound journal. I opened it. The handwriting inside was hers, my wife's. "If you find this, it means you've finally followed the ticket. Don't be afraid of what you see. Rosewood isn't a place, it's a promise. The train doesn't take you away, it brings you home." My vision blurred. I sat down heavily on the edge of the bed, clutching the journal. For the first time in years, I felt something break open in my chest, a flood of longing and peace mixed together. People still debate whether love ends at death or if it simply changes address. I didn't have an answer. But sitting in that room, surrounded by echoes of her handwriting and her scent, I felt closer to her than I had since the day she left. A faint hum began beneath the floor, the same low vibration I'd heard at the station. I looked toward the window. In the distance past the forest, I could see faint golden light flickering like a train passing through mist. I knew what it meant. The next day wasn't waiting for me anymore. It had already arrived. I didn't leave Rosewood Inn until dawn. The journal sat heavy in my coat pocket, the key tied to its ribbon still clutched in my hand. Outside, the woods were shrouded in a pale fog that seemed to glow faintly from within, like the air itself was remembering something. The road leading back toward the station felt longer this time, as if each step stretched the world thinner, pulling me closer to some line I wasn't supposed to cross. My wife's words echoed in my mind. "The train doesn't take you away, it brings you home." What did she mean by that? When I reached the station, the same hum was already there, vibrating through the platform stones. The sign above the entrance, which had been half broken the day before, was perfectly whole now. Rosewood Station glinted in the early light. Someone or something had cleaned it. Even the pigeons were gone. Inside, the candles were still burning. Their flames didn't flicker or melt down. They just glowed, steady, eternal, as if the wax itself had stopped aging. I sat on the same bench where I'd waited before, the same one where I'd seen the woman in the red scarf. The air carried a faint scent of perfume and damp rain. I pulled the journal out again. On the last page, beneath her final entry, I noticed faint indentations like someone had written a note and torn it out. I rubbed a pencil over the page to reveal the marks. The words appeared slowly, one by one. "Board at 9:05. Don't be afraid, I'll be there." People still debate whether messages from the dead are real or just echoes bouncing through our guilt. I didn't know which I preferred, that she was truly reaching out or that I'd gone mad enough to imagine it. Either way, I wasn't leaving without finding out. At precisely 9:03, the air changed. You could feel it, like the atmosphere bending inward, listening. The hum deepened until it resonated in my bones. Then from the tunnel came that light again, a train gleaming gold beneath the fog, emerging as though it had always been there, waiting just out of sight. This time, I stood. The doors opened with a gentle sigh, and the warmth that spilled out smelled like lavender honey and old wood, the scent of home. I stepped closer. Inside, the train glowed with soft amber light. Plush seats lined the aisle, and faint music played from somewhere distant. Sinatra, the same song she'd always hummed while cleaning the kitchen. My cane trembled in my hand. "All right," I whispered. "Let's see where you're taking me." I stepped inside. The moment my shoe touched the floor, the air shifted. The sound of the world outside fell silent. I turned back, expecting to see the platform fade, but it didn't. Instead, I saw myself, still standing there on the other side of the glass, staring blankly forward. The man on the platform looked older, heavier, emptier. Me, but not quite. Then the train jolted gently forward, and that reflection dissolved into mist. I walked down the aisle. Every seat was occupied, though the faces were half-shadowed, familiar in strange ways. An old woman knitting with red yarn glanced up and smiled knowingly. A young man in a brown coat nodded as if greeting an old friend. Across from him, a middle-aged couple shared a thermos of tea, the exact brand I'd been drinking at home. One of them looked up and said quietly, "You made it." I wanted to ask how they knew me, but the words caught in my throat. The hum of the train softened into something like a heartbeat. I sat down near the window, and the conductor appeared. He wore an immaculate uniform, silver buttons glinting in the golden light. He didn't speak, just looked at my ticket, stamped it once, and smiled gently. The ink shimmered for a moment, and I saw new words appear. Homebound confirmed. Through the window, the world outside was changing. Not passing, changing. First, the familiar hills rolled by, then the landscape began to flicker between years. I saw our wedding day under a summer sky, the white dress she wore fluttering like light. Then a sudden shift, our first apartment, the smell of burnt toast and fresh paint. Another flicker, my son's first day of school, my wife waving as the bus drove away. The train wasn't moving through space, it was moving through time. Through us. I pressed my hand to the glass, unable to breathe for a moment. Each scene lasted only seconds but felt eternal. My reflection merged with every version of myself, young, tired, grieving, laughing. I realized I wasn't watching memories. I was passing through them. There's a philosophical argument called eternalism, the idea that every moment in time exists simultaneously, and our perception just slides along it like a bead on a string. Sitting on that train, I understood it not as theory, but as truth. The conductor passed by again, murmuring something low. I barely caught it. Everyone rides home eventually. Some just take the long way. I turned to ask what he meant, but he was already gone. In his place sat a single teacup on the table beside me, steaming gently. Earl Grey with honey, my wife's favorite. The porcelain bore a tiny crack near the handle, the same one she'd dropped once and glued back together. My chest tightened. I lifted the cup and, as I did, I saw movement down the aisle. A figure, standing near the end of the carriage, framed by golden light. She was wearing the red scarf. She didn't move toward me, not yet. Just stood there, smiling softly, like she was waiting for me to find my courage again. For a long moment, I couldn't move. I just sat there, the teacup trembling in my hand, watching her. The red scarf, draped over her shoulder, caught the golden light and glowed like an ember in the dim air of the carriage. It was her. Not a memory, not an illusion. It was my wife, standing there exactly as I remembered her from the year before she passed. Her hair tied back loosely, that quiet, knowing smile, and those eyes kind and amused like she was waiting for me to say something foolish. The train rocked gently as it glided through the flickering scenery of my life, and all I could do was whisper, "You look just the same." She didn't answer. Not at first. She tilted her head slightly, and I heard her voice soft, calm, the voice I thought I'd never hear again. "You took your time." My throat closed up. "You left me a ticket," I managed. I didn't know what it meant. Her smile deepened. "You were never late," she said, just hesitant. She gestured to the seat across from me, and as I blinked, she was suddenly there, sitting in it. The air felt warmer. The train's hum quieted, replaced by a faint rhythm like a heartbeat. I tried to reach for her hand, but my fingers met a kind of resistance, not cold, just soft like mist with weight. "Am I dreaming?" I asked. "Something between," she said. Dreams and endings are cousins, you know. I wanted to laugh to tell her that sounded like something she'd say when we were younger, and she wanted to sound mysterious. But I couldn't. The tears came instead uninvited and unrestrained. She leaned forward, that same patient look on her face, and said, "You always needed proof, but love doesn't keep receipts. People still debate whether we carry the dead or they carry us." I used to think I bore the full weight of her absence every day. The empty chair at breakfast, the way I'd start talking before remembering no one was there to answer. But sitting across from her now, I realized maybe she'd been carrying me all along, waiting for the moment I was willing to listen. The train glided into a tunnel and the windows turned to mirrors. I could see both of us reflected, her face clear and serene, mine old and worn, but alive in a way it hadn't been for years. "Why now?" I asked. "Why this ticket, this station?" She looked out the window at the darkness, her reflection overlapping with mine. "Because you finally looked down," she said. "You finally stopped pretending to fix the floor and noticed what was beneath it." I laughed softly. "You always hated that room." "I didn't hate it," she said with a little grin. "I just knew you'd find me there eventually." Outside, light bloomed again, and the tunnel gave way to an impossible landscape, golden fields rolling into endless horizon, the sky the color of late afternoon. The train tracks shimmered like liquid light, curving gently toward what looked like a vast sunlit station in the distance. My chest tightened with recognition. "That's not real," I whispered. "That's memory." She finished for me. Ours. The other passengers began to stir. The old woman folded her knitting and smiled at me. The young man in the brown coat raised his cup in a quiet toast. One by one they turned toward the windows, faces calm, almost radiant. I realized with a shock that I recognized every single one of them. Neighbors, co-workers, even the conductor from my morning commute 30 years ago. All people long gone. The train slowed slightly. She turned back to me, her hand hovering above the table close enough that I could feel warmth radiating from it. "You don't have to stay long," she said, "but I wanted you to see that I kept my promise." "What promise?" I asked, even though I already knew. She smiled. "That I'd save you a seat." I looked down at my ticket again. The words had changed. The destination no longer said Rosewood Station. It now read, "Homebound, 2 passengers confirmed." "I'm not ready," I said quietly. "There's still our son, the house, the garden." Her eyes softened. "There will always be something left behind," she said. "That's how we know we were alive. People still debate whether death is a departure or a reunion." Sitting there, I realized it didn't matter. The only real tragedy is forgetting how to say goodbye properly. The conductor appeared again, silent as before. He nodded politely at both of us and whispered, "Arrival in 5 minutes." Then he turned and walked toward the next carriage. The lights flickered. Outside, the sky began to dim, shifting from gold to a deep twilight blue. The station ahead shimmered like a mirage, its sign unreadable from this distance. She stood up slowly. "You can get off with me," she said, "or you can ride back. The ticket works both ways just this once. What happens if I stay? Then you'll wake up," she said, "and you'll remember." My hands clenched around the teacup. It was growing cooler now, the steam fading. "And if I go with you?" She smiled, her voice barely a whisper. "Then you won't need to remember." I looked at her for a long time. Every part of me wanted to stand, to take her hand, to follow her wherever this train was heading. But something deep in my chest, the same instinct that stopped me from stepping aboard the first day, held me still. "Not yet," I said softly. "I still have something to finish." She nodded, not disappointed, just serene. "Then finish it," she said. "But don't take too long. Tomorrow always comes sooner than you think. The train began to slow. The station drew closer, its sign now visible, Platform 0 homebound. The doors slid open, letting in a soft, golden light that felt like sunlight and song combined. She turned toward it, then looked back at me one last time. "You were never late," she repeated and stepped through. The moment she crossed the threshold, the train filled with lavender and warmth, then silence. The doors closed. The lights flickered once more. The conductor's voice echoed softly. "Return, route initiating." Outside, the landscape began to fade, the golden fields dissolving into mist. The hum rose again, and I felt the weight of the world tilt gently backward. My eyelids grew heavy, my heartbeat sinking with the rhythm of the rails. When I opened my eyes, I was back in my own bed. Morning sunlight slanted through the curtains, pale and cold. The house was quiet. The clock on the wall ticked steadily again. On my nightstand lay the teacup, still warm. Next to it, the ticket. But the date had changed. It now read June 18th, 2025, today. People still debate whether dreams are messages or rehearsals. I didn't know which mine was, but I knew what I had to do. I got up, dressed, and slipped the ticket into my pocket one last time. The sunlight felt different that morning, clearer somehow. The world outside my window was the same, yet everything in it seemed sharper, more deliberate. I could hear the hum of a distant lawnmower, the caw of crows on the power line, even the faint ticking of the clock that had frozen just days before. But now, every sound felt synchronized, like the whole town had unknowingly tuned itself to some rhythm I was finally able to hear. I sat on the edge of the bed, the ticket between my fingers. The paper was warm. I turned it over slowly, expecting to see those familiar 3 words. "Don't be late," but instead someone had written something new in faint blue ink. "Bring the key." The brass key still hung from my bedside lamp by the blue ribbon. I hadn't realized how much I'd come to think of it as an anchor. I slipped it into my coat pocket and left the house. The morning air had that fragile chill right before the day decides to turn warm. I walked toward the bus stop, and as I did, I noticed something strange. The people I passed on the street, a man jogging, a woman walking her dog, a boy on a bike. Each gave me a small nod. It wasn't the polite kind you exchange with strangers. It was the kind you give to someone you recognize. Their faces blurred as I tried to focus on them like I was looking through water. People still debate whether reality ever bends to meet our grief, or whether grief just warps our perception until we start to see the bends that were always there. I didn't feel frightened anymore, just awake. The bus arrived late, but the driver wasn't the same one as before. This one was younger, with an expression that felt oddly familiar. "Rosewood Station?" I asked. He smiled faintly. "That's where we're all headed, sir." I opened my mouth to question him, but something in his tone made me stop. The landscape outside the window changed faster than I remembered. The houses grew farther apart, the trees denser. Every so often I caught glimpses of movement in the woods, like figures walking between the trunks just beyond recognition. My reflection in the glass looked steadier than I felt. I wasn't shaking anymore. I wasn't even tired. When the bus stopped, I stepped off, expecting the same decayed ruins of the old station. But what greeted me this time took my breath away. Rosewood Station was fully restored, shining tiles, brass railings, the clock above the gate ticking perfectly at 9:01. The air smelled of fresh rain and coal smoke. People bustled about, dressed in clothes from every decade, some in coats and hats, others in summer dresses or modern jackets. They didn't seem surprised to see each other. It was like they'd all just arrived home after a long day. The green ticket gate blinked softly, waiting. I took out my ticket and slid it through. Beep! The light turned gold this time, not green. The gate opened with a small chime. As I stepped through, the ground beneath me vibrated that same steady hum I'd felt before, now comforting instead of uncanny. "Good morning, Mr. Warren," a voice said behind me. I turned. The station attendant stood there, the same one I'd seen years ago when I used to commute daily. But he looked exactly the same, not a day older. "You're right on time," he said warmly. "You know me." He smiled. "We all know you. You're a regular." He gestured toward Platform 7, the one printed on my ticket. I followed the sound of my cane tapping softly on the stone floor. The platform was brighter now, no fog, no candles. At the far end, a train waited, gleaming silver with blue accents, the same colors as her favorite scarf. Its sign read simply, "Homebound service boarding now." I approached slowly. The doors slid open before I could touch them. Inside, the same golden light pulsed gently like breath. I hesitated on the threshold, and that's when I noticed something. There were people waiting just beyond the entrance. The same faces from before, the knitting woman, the young man, the conductor. And among them, standing quietly near the middle, was my wife. She didn't wave this time. She didn't need to. Her eyes said everything. I stepped inside. The door closed behind me with a soft click. The hum deepened, and for a moment I thought I could feel every cell in my body exhale. The world outside the window began to dissolve into streaks of light. I took a seat beside her. "You said the ticket works both ways," I murmured. She nodded. "It does. But now you understand that home isn't behind or ahead. It's between. Between what I asked, between everything you remember and everything you've forgotten." Her hand hovered near mine, and though I still couldn't feel her skin, I felt the warmth like sunlight through fabric. "You've carried too much," she said. "All these years thinking you were walking alone." "I was alone," I said quietly. "After you—" "No," she interrupted gently. "You were walking with what I left behind. Grief isn't a chain, it's a map." I turned to the window. The view had changed again. We were passing scenes from my life, but they weren't the moments I expected. Not the big ones, not the wedding or the funeral, or the birthdays. These were the small ones. The night we argued about burnt rice, the day our son colored the living room wall. And we laughed instead of scolding him, the morning she accidentally wore mismatched shoes to church. The details that seemed meaningless at the time, but now glowed like jewels. People still debate whether our lives flash before our eyes when we die. I think it's not the flash that matters, it's the recognition. The sudden understanding that every dull moment was part of the same grand miracle. The train slowed again. Outside, the horizon shimmered. A faint, silvery platform stretched into the distance, lined with people waiting. They waved, some smiling, some crying, all radiant in the fading light. I realized they were the faces from my memories, my parents, my brother, friends. I'd buried long ago. Even my childhood dog wagged its tail at the edge of the platform. I turned to her heart, aching with both joy and sorrow. "Is this it?" she smiled. "Not yet. You're not finished remembering." The conductor's voice echoed softly over the speaker. "Next stop, the border of time. Passengers continuing onward, please prepare. Passengers returning, remain seated." She looked at me, eyes shimmering like sunlight on water. "You can go back," she said. "If you do, you'll forget some of this, but not all. Just enough to live." I swallowed hard. "And you?" "I stay where I am," she said, "until you're ready to make the trip without a return." The train coasted gently to a stop. The doors slid open to a light too bright to look at directly. I felt her hand on my shoulder, or maybe it was only the warmth she left behind. "Remember," she whispered, "you were never late." The whistle blew softly, long and low like a sigh of farewell, and then the light pulled everything away. When I opened my eyes, I was sitting on a park bench near the station ruins, the morning sun rising over the trees. Birds were chirping. A jogger passed by. The world was ordinary again, but in my hand there was something new. Not the ticket, not the key, but her red scarf folded neatly in my palm. The scarf felt impossibly soft between my fingers, warm even in the cool morning air. I held it to my face and caught that familiar blend of jasmine and cedar, the scent that had followed me through years of silence and now wrapped itself around me like an embrace. For a while, I just sat there on the park bench, watching the sunlight filter through the branches. The world was moving again. People walking dogs, a cyclist passing by, a bus rumbling down the distant road. But to me, everything felt slowed, like time itself was catching its breath. I looked toward the direction of the old rosewood tracks, though the trees had reclaimed them long ago. The faint hum that had haunted me for days was gone. In its place was a strange stillness, not empty, but peaceful, like a sigh at the end of a long story. I slipped the scarf into my coat pocket and stood up, leaning a little on my cane. My legs were heavier than usual, but my mind felt clearer than it had in years. I knew I should go home, have breakfast, take my pills, maybe call my son, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't done yet. The ticket had said homebound, and though I had come back, I couldn't help but wonder if I'd truly arrived. Back home, the house greeted me with the same quiet it always had. The teacup was still on the nightstand, empty now, but spotless as if it had been washed and returned without my noticing. The clock ticked smoothly. 9:05 having finally passed. I went to the kitchen, made a pot of tea, and placed 2 cups on the table out of habit. Then I laughed under my breath. Old routines die hard, don't they? I poured 1 cup and left the other untouched. People still debate whether the afterlife is somewhere else entirely, or whether it seeps into our world through the cracks of memory and longing. I don't think I could ever explain to anyone what happened, or maybe it's better that way. Some things lose their meaning when spoken aloud. As I sipped my tea, I noticed something glinting by the window. The brass key. I could have sworn I'd left it on the nightstand, but now it lay on the sill, bathed in sunlight. Next to it was a folded piece of paper, the edges curled as though it had been there for days. I opened it carefully. The handwriting was hers again. "Check the garden. Don't be afraid." I stepped outside. The air was crisp, filled with that earthy scent after a night of dew. Our garden had always been her pride. The rows of lilies, the ivy, climbing the fence, the wooden bench we'd built together when our son was still a boy. For years it had fallen into quiet neglect, but now, to my surprise, the lilies were blooming again. Every one of them, white, perfect, bending slightly in the morning light. At the center of the garden, the old sundial caught my eye. It hadn't worked in ages, but now the gnomon cast a clean shadow right at the number 9. Something small and metallic glinted beneath it. I knelt down slowly, carefully, and brushed away the soil. Another key. But this one was silver, its bow engraved with the word locker. I knew immediately where it belonged. The nearest train depot was a few miles away, one of the few modern ones still in operation. I took a cab, the scarf still tucked in my coat pocket. The driver didn't ask where I was going, he just nodded as if he'd already been told. When I arrived, I made my way through the bustling terminal people, rushing past me in every direction, each carrying their own quiet urgency. I felt like a ghost among them, unseen yet utterly present. The lockers were lined up against the far wall rows of metal doors, each one with a number. The silver key fit perfectly into 211, the same number as the hotel room. My hand trembled as I turned it. Inside was a small wooden box, beautifully polished with my initials carved faintly on the lid. I opened it slowly. Inside were photographs, some familiar, others I had never seen before. There was one of us at the train platform the year we first met, another of our son as a toddler, holding a toy locomotive, and one that made my breath catch me sitting alone on the park bench this very morning, the red scarf folded in my lap. The photo looked freshly printed. I turned it over. On the back, written in her elegant handwriting, "You made it home." I sat down right there in the depot, letting the sounds of the crowd fade around me. My heart didn't race this time. It just beat steadily like it had found its rhythm again. I don't know how long I sat there, minutes, maybe hours, but when I looked up, the sunlight had shifted across the tiles. The world felt heavier again, real and present. I placed the photo back into the box, along with the scarf and both keys. Then, without thinking, I closed the lid and slid it back into the locker. Some things aren't meant to be taken. They're meant to stay where they belong, waiting for whoever comes next. People still debate whether closure is an end or simply another beginning. I used to think I'd never find it, that grief was something to survive, not something to understand. But now I think grief is just love, with nowhere to go, and the trick is learning to follow it without getting lost. As I walked back toward the exit, I caught my reflection in the glass door. For a split second there were two of me, one stepping out, one still standing inside, smiling faintly before fading into the light. I didn't flinch this time. I just nodded like an old friend acknowledging another. Outside the sun was high, and a light breeze tugged gently at my coat. I could still hear trains coming and going in the distance, that rhythmic clatter blending with the sound of my footsteps. I didn't need to look back. Whatever had waited for me at Rosewood Station had already done its work. That night I sat by the window, a notebook open on my lap. I wrote everything down: the ticket, the train, the scarf, her voice, the impossible warmth of that other world. I didn't know if anyone would ever read it, but it didn't matter. It wasn't for proof. It was a promise kept. When I finished writing, I closed the notebook and left it on the table beside the untouched teacup. I turned off the lights, opened the window, and let the cool night air drift in. Somewhere far away, a train whistle sounded. I smiled. Maybe it was real, maybe it wasn't. But one thing was certain: tomorrow would come, and I wouldn't be afraid of it anymore. I woke the next morning to the sound of rain, soft and steady against the windows, the kind that turns the world quiet and reflective. The gray light gave everything in the room a gentle blur, like reality itself had softened its edges. I sat up slowly, my joints protesting, but my mind clear. The notebook from the night before was still on the table, the last page open where I'd written, "Tomorrow isn't something you wait for. It's something you walk toward." The words didn't feel like mine when I read them, more like something whispered through me. Still, they felt true. I made my tea, poured 1 cup instead of 2 this time, and watched the steam curl upward. The red scarf lay folded neatly beside the kettle. I couldn't bring myself to store it away. It belonged right there, visible, alive, part of the morning. People still debate whether the dead leave signs to comfort us, or if we invent them to comfort ourselves. I've stopped caring which it is. Comfort is comfort. Outside, the rain eased to a drizzle. I decided to take a walk, no umbrella. Just the old brown coat and my cane. The world smelled of wet earth and clean air. My shoes splashed lightly through puddles as I walked toward the small hill behind the house where a rusted fence marked the boundary of what used to be an unused track bed. Beyond it, the trees swayed gently, and through them I could almost hear a rhythm, a pulse that could have been thunder or something older, quieter waiting. As I climbed the hill, memories came in fragments, the way she used to complain about the rain frizzing her hair, the way she'd always take my arm when the ground got slippery, pretending she needed help, even though she was steadier than I ever was. I smiled to myself. When I reached the top, the view took me by surprise. Where I expected to see overgrown rails, there was a faint indentation, a long curve of dark soil glistening with water, and just beyond it, barely visible through the fog, stood a sign, not wooden or rusted this time, but new or new-looking. It read, "Platform 0 Homebound." I blinked hard. When I looked again, the fog had thickened and the sign was gone. Maybe it was my imagination, maybe not. Either way, I didn't feel afraid. Instead, I sat down on the damp grass, folded my hands over the head of my cane, and let the drizzle soak into my coat. The air was still humming faintly low and steady, the same frequency that had once come from the heart of that impossible train. It's funny, the things you start to notice when you stop looking for proof. The world becomes full of quiet coincidences that feel less like chance and more like choreography. The clock that always stops at the same time. The scent that appears in rooms you haven't entered. The small bursts of warmth in the air when you're talking to no one. Maybe they're tricks of the mind. Or maybe they're reminders, the universe's way of saying you're not finished yet. Back home, I spent the afternoon sorting through old letters and photographs. I didn't cry. I just looked at every smile, every wrinkle, every messy, beautiful detail of a life I'd almost forgotten to cherish. Among the piles, I found one envelope I'd never seen before. It was addressed simply, "To you from her." The handwriting wasn't hers, but it had the same gentleness. My heart quickened as I opened it. Inside was a single photograph, me much younger, sitting at Rosewood Station, with her head resting on my shoulder. Behind us, the sign read, "Homebound 1984." On the back, written in that same neat blue ink I'd seen before, "You caught the right train after all." I laughed softly, the sound half broken, half joyful. People still debate whether time heals all wounds. I think it doesn't heal them, it just folds them neatly until you can hold them without bleeding. That photograph was proof enough. That evening I built a fire. I hadn't done that in years. The crackle filled the living room with warmth, and I poured myself another cup of tea. I didn't bother turning on the TV or the radio. The only sound was the gentle hiss of rain and the ticking clock that now ran perfectly on time. I could almost hear her humming in the kitchen that same tune, "Fly Me to the Moon." At one point, I must have dozed off, because when I opened my eyes again, the fire had burned low and the house was bathed in amber glow. For a moment, I thought I saw her reflection in the window, faint but unmistakable, smiling that same soft smile. I didn't move. I didn't speak. I just nodded the way one nods to an old friend when words are unnecessary. Then the image faded and the reflection became my own. The next morning, I woke before dawn. The house felt lighter, like something invisible had finally lifted. The scarf still lay on the counter, and beside it, impossibly, was the brass key again. I turned it over in my palm. It was warm. The number 211 gleamed faintly in the gray light. I packed a small bag, tea thermos, notebook, coat scarf, and the key, and walked to the station one last time. The air was cold, sharper than usual. Birds were just beginning to stir. The world was caught in that delicate pause between night and day when everything feels like it's holding its breath. Rosewood Station looked as it had before the first time I found it, half ruined, half forgotten. But there was no hum, no golden glow, just silence. I stood on the platform and took the ticket from my pocket. The date was gone. In its place were 3 words, "You're already here." I laughed, then out loud, the sound echoing across the empty tracks. It wasn't a sad laugh. It was relief, the kind that comes when you finally understand there was never anywhere else to be. I sat on the bench, pulled out the thermos, and poured a small cup. The steam rose into the cold air. I lifted it slightly, like a toast, and whispered, "For you, darling, for tomorrow." Somewhere deep in the tunnel I heard a sound. Not the roar of a train this time, but a faint chime, soft, lingering, melodic. Then the wind stirred, carrying with it a whisper almost too quiet to catch. But I knew that voice. You were never late. I smiled, set the cup down beside me, and closed my eyes. For once, there was no waiting left to do. People still debate whether endings are real or if everything simply circles back to where it began. Sitting there in the gray light, wrapped in her scarf, I finally stopped debating. Some stories don't end. They just fade into the hum of the next one beginning. The world felt different now, quieter in a way that wasn't empty. It was as if everything, every wall in the house, every tree along the road, every breath I took had finally exhaled. I went through my days as usual, yet nothing about them was usual anymore. The small moments had changed shape. When the kettle whistled, I thought of the train's whistle. When I turned the page of my book, the soft paper made the same sound as the ticket slipping through the gate. When I caught my reflection in the hallway mirror for half a second, I'd see her standing just behind me, smiling. And I didn't flinch. I'd smile back. I'd always assumed growing old meant watching the world leave you behind, your work, your friends, even your children as they build their own lives. But maybe it's the opposite. Maybe growing old means learning to walk beside ghosts without fear. Every photo on the wall, every creak in the floorboard, every whispered memory, they weren't reminders of what I'd lost, but proof that I'd lived deeply enough to miss something. People still debate whether love survives the body. I've stopped debating. I've seen too much not to believe that it does. Maybe it's energy, maybe it's memory, maybe it's both, but it lingers. It waits patiently like a platform bathed in fog until we're ready to board the next train. One morning I decided to visit the library downtown. It was the same one where my wife used to volunteer on Thursdays, reading aloud to children. I hadn't stepped inside since she passed. The scent hit me the second I opened the door, paper dust, faint vanilla from old bindings. Time didn't move. Here, it settled. As I browsed the aisles, a particular book caught my attention, a worn blue journal sitting out of place on a shelf that should have held novels. No title on the cover. I picked it up, flipping through. The handwriting inside was unfamiliar but strangely personal reflections about time, memory loss, and of all things, trains. My breath caught when I reached the last page. It simply said, "Every departure is a return in disguise." Beneath that line, a faint stamp, "Rosewood Library Archive." I asked the librarian about it. She frowned. "That section's been empty for years. You must have brought that from somewhere else." When I turned to show her the shelf behind me was bare. The book was gone. I walked home slowly, rain starting again, cold drops running down my collar. Yet I wasn't chilled. Something inside me burned, steady, warm, and sure. That night I sat at my desk, opened my own notebook, and began writing. Not to her this time, but for anyone who might one day find it the way I had found hers. I wrote about the strange ticket, the forgotten station, the woman in the red scarf, the train that moved through time. I described how fear feels. Before wonder, how grief sounds before it quiets. And at the end I wrote, "If you ever find an expired ticket dated for tomorrow, don't throw it away. It's not a mistake. It's a reminder that the future still remembers you." When I finished, I placed the notebook beneath the loose floorboard where I'd found the ticket all those days ago. A small circle complete. The next few weeks slipped by gently. I found myself laughing more at the birds, fighting over crumbs at the stubborn faucet that still leaked no matter how many times I fixed it at my own reflection sometimes. My son called more often, too. He said he didn't know why, just that he'd been thinking of me lately. He told me he was planning to visit next month. "Don't go running off anywhere before then. Okay, Dad," he joked. I promised I wouldn't. But part of me wondered what running off meant anymore. Maybe he sensed it too, that quiet gravity pulling me forward the way a tide knows when to rise. One evening I dreamt I was back at Rosewood Station. Everything glowed faintly, as if lit from within. The platform clock read 9:05. The doors of the train were open, and music drifted through Sinatra again, her favorite. My wife stood at the far end, the red scarf trailing behind her, waving once. Just once. When I woke, the house was bathed in pale dawn light. My chest didn't ache. My breath came easy. On the nightstand beside the teacup lay the brass key. I hadn't seen it since I left it in the garden. Attached to it now was a small paper tag. 3 words, "For tonight only." That day passed in a haze of calm. I cleaned the reading room, sorted through old letters, even whistled a tune. At sunset, I sat in the garden watching the sky bleed from orange to indigo. The lilies glowed faintly in the dimming light, their petals open and still. The hum returned, then soft, distant, steady. I didn't turn toward it right away. I just closed my eyes and let it wash through me. People still debate whether we know the moment we're about to cross over. I think we do. But it doesn't come with thunder or light. It comes with stillness, the kind that feels like forgiveness. When the wind stirred carrying that faint scent of lavender, I knew. I stood slowly, the brass key in my hand, and walked toward the hill. The fog had rolled in thick by then, softening every edge. As I reached the crest, the outline of the platform shimmered into view, clear this time, solid. The sign above it glowed faintly, "Platform 0 homebound." I smiled. "You waited," I said aloud. The whistle sounded once, low and kind. The doors opened. Warm light spilled onto the grass, golden and familiar. I stepped forward, gripping the key tightly, and for the first time, I didn't look back. Inside, the train looked exactly as it had before. The velvet seats, the soft golden glow, the faint hum of life moving beyond life. And there she was sitting by the window, the red scarf folded neatly on her lap. "Took you long enough," she teased. I laughed, breathless. "You always said I was slow to pack." She reached out her hand, not mist now, but real, warm, solid. I took it, no resistance, just touch, connection. The conductor appeared one last time, smiling. 2 passengers confirmed, he said, stamping both our tickets. The ink shimmered silver, then faded. Outside the window, the world began to move, not backward, not forward, but inward. Light and shadow folding together, colors deepening into something beyond sight. She leaned her head on my shoulder. I rested mine against hers. The hum grew softer, slower, like a heartbeat settling into rest. "You ready?" she whispered. "Yes," I said. "I'm home." And as the train glided into that endless golden horizon, the sound of the world faded into the quiet rhythm of eternity, steady, sure, timeless. People still debate whether love survives the end. I don't. Because when the train disappears from sight, it doesn't vanish. It just arrives somewhere new. If you've stayed with me this far, thank you. Maybe you felt it too, that quiet pull between what's gone and what still lingers. Life isn't a straight line. It's a loop of moments, some we return to again and again, until we understand them enough to let go. That's all this story was, a reminder that letting go isn't the same as saying goodbye. So wherever you are right now, take a breath. Think of the people you've lost, the things that still haunt you, the loves that never really left. They're closer than you think. They're sitting somewhere just off the edge of what your eyes can see, waiting patiently for you to notice the shimmer in the air. And when you do, when you finally hear that faint whistle in the distance, don't be afraid. You're not leaving. You're just going home. Now turn off the lights. Maybe keep the fan on for that soft hum in the background. And if you ever find an old train ticket dated for tomorrow, take it. Some journeys only begin when you finally stop running from them. Thank you for listening. Sleep well tonight, and remember, tomorrow isn't over yet.